Our story begins in the 1890s in Hanover, Germany, where Karl August Friedrich Dumatz and his wife Johanna Dorothea Carolina Humpel were raising their family. A son, Heinrich Friedrich Albert Adolf Dumatz, was born on March 17, 1891. On September 16, 1892, a daughter, Margareta Helena Anna Dumatz, was born, and on July 23, 1894, another daughter, Annalena Frieda Dumatz, known to us as Frieda, was born. Not much is known about Frieda's early years living in Germany. In general, the country had a strong education system, and many Germans took pride in their military, seeing the army as a symbol of national strength and unity. But when World War I began, the lives of German citizens were turned upside down. The war effort required enormous sacrifices from the population, with men conscripted to fight and women taking on new roles in factories, farms, and offices to keep the country running. Food shortages became severe, particularly after the British naval blockade cut off supplies, and inflation made everyday goods unaffordable. Hunger was widespread, and many families lived in constant fear as news of casualties from the front lines arrived. By the war's end, Germany was exhausted, and the everyday German felt disillusioned and betrayed. Hyperinflation wiped out savings, and unemployment soared, leaving families struggling to survive. Whether these conditions contributed to Frieda's decision to leave Germany, we'll never know. But whatever the reason, Frieda left Germany at the end of 1922 and headed for America. Frieda secured a job as a laundress aboard the German ship Hansa, which she boarded on December 21, 1922 at the port in Hamburg. According to the ship's manifest, she was 28 years old, stood 5 feet 1 inch tall, and weighed 107 pounds. The Hansa arrived in New York on January 1, 1923. Family lore says that Frieda disembarked wearing every piece of clothing she owned, ready to begin her new life in America. Although she had entered the United States illegally and was listed as an illegal alien, the law at that time included a 3-year statute of limitations, meaning that if she was not caught by January 1, 1926, she would not be deported. The Russo family lived in Bagnoli, Italy. Sabatino Russo was a gardener, and Chiara Stella, his wife, did laundry and cleaned houses for others. They had 12 children. However, some died before the age of 5. The surviving children were Anna, Elena, Assunte, Rosina, Pasquale, and Antonio. There is conflicting information as to Antonio's exact date of birth, but it is believed to be May 18, 1892. Little is known about Antonio's childhood in Italy, but the early 1900s were marked by social change, economic struggle, and political uncertainty. When World War I began, life for Italians became even harder, with widespread poverty, unrest, and severe hardships. The war led to food shortages, inflation, and economic instability, making daily survival a challenge. These harsh conditions may have driven Antonio to seek a new life in America. While tracking down the exact date of his arrival is difficult due to the commonality of the name Antonio Russo, the 1930 census records show that he immigrated to the U.S. in 1922 and had already filed his first papers, his declaration of intention to become a U.S. citizen. Despite the language barrier, Antonio speaking only Italian and Frieda only German, they somehow met, fell in love, and got married. According to the New York State Marriage Index, their official wedding date is recorded as January 17, 1927 in Canaan, New York. However, in 1942, Frieda listed their marriage date as October 25, 1924, also in Canaan. It's possible that the couple waited to formalize their marriage until Frieda was no longer at risk of deportation, which would have been after 1926, 3 years after her arrival. On November 2, 1925, the couple welcomed their first child, Sabatino Russo, whom we know as Sam. He was born at St. Luke's Hospital in Pittsfield, Massachusetts. At the time of Sabatino's birth, the Russo family resided at 10 Lake Street in Pittsfield. However, by the time the 1926 Pittsfield Directory was published, they had relocated to 213 Fenn Street, which was only about a half-mile away. The young family didn't stay in Pittsfield, Massachusetts for long. They soon moved to Canaan, New York, where they were officially married on January 17, 1927. And on June 17, 1927, their second child, Orlando, was born in nearby New Lebanon, New York. By 1928, the Russos had moved once again, this time to Torrington, Connecticut. In the 1929 city directory, their address was 17 South Street. This is most likely where they were living when their third child, Margaret, was born on November 5, 1928. By 1930, they had moved once again, this time to 24 Lawn Street in Torrington. That is where they were living on May 9, 1930, when Frieda's life changed in a way she could have never imagined. On May 12, 1930, the body of Antonio Russo was found not far from his home on Lawn Street. Newspaper reports said that Antonio had died from suicide and that he had been despondent for some time. But a few days later, the case was reopened when a bullet wound was found in Antonio's back. Dr. H.B. Hanchett, medical examiner, had reclassified the case as a homicide and sent his findings to the police and the coroner. In a letter to Antonio's mother, Chiarostella, Frieda recounted the tragic events of early May.
One evening my husband left the house at about 11 o'clock. He said he was going out for business. He did not return ever since. The next day we tried to locate him, but all in vain. I informed the police, but all in vain. 3 days later he was found dead in a grove 300 yards from our house. Coincidentally, passing by that place a little boy made the sorry discovery. The initial story was, my husband had fired 2 shots from a revolver to his right temple, dying on the ground on the path of this grove. The revolver was close to him. In his left hand he held a note that said I'd kill myself for not seeing my family suffer. This way it appeared to be a true suicide. Police and authorities advised me that it was a real suicide. It was only during his funeral, as they were going to bury him, that a new order from the authorities came in to suspend all. When a new autopsy took place on the dead body, it was found a bullet in his back. Then a new hypothesis was issued. Someone had killed him, then brought to that place to make it believed that it was suicide.
The police moved quickly. On May 24th, they arrested 2 men, Theodoro Adamo and Domenico Chiarello, on warrants issued by the coroner, Samuel A. Herman. Coroner Herman had conducted an intensive investigation and released the following information in his report.
In the afternoon of said May 9th, and for a short time in the evening of that day, Theodoro Adamo of Torrington was with the deceased. In the evening he was at the deceased home. The deceased had invented some sort of automobile headlight, and the said Adamo and one Domenico Chiarello and some others had deposited some money with Russo to perfect the invention and pursue a patent. The deceased was also employed by Chiarello in the construction of 2 or 3 dwellings, and he would receive half the profits when the dwellings sold. The deceased returned home on May 9th with a light automobile truck, and Theodoro Adamo was with him. Adamo stayed for a short time at the deceased house, and upon his leaving, the deceased said, "I bring my wife and kids up to Mike's mother-in-law's. I will be back in time." About 7 o'clock in the evening, the deceased brought his wife and 3 children to Mike's mother-in-law's, where they had supper. He got some onion sets, returned to his home about 8 o'clock, and planted the onions in his garden. At about 11:30 that evening, he left his home, telling his wife he was going to get some money, and that was the last time his wife saw him alive.
On September 4, 1930, Theodore Adamo and Domenico Chiarello were indicted by a special grand jury and charged with first-degree murder. The pair had been arrested in late May of the same year and held without bond. Theodore Adamo was an Italian immigrant who had fought with the Italian forces during World War I. He was wounded during battle and held prisoner by the Austrians. He escaped and crawled 2 miles to return to his unit. He was said to be suffering from shell shock after his ordeal. At the time of his arrest, he was about 30 years old and a resident of Torrington. Domenico Chiarello was 48 years old at the time of his arrest. He had immigrated from Italy in 1914 and settled in Torrington in 1917, where he ran a shoe repair shop at 366 Church Street. He was married and had 3 children, all of whom were living in Italy at the time. The highly anticipated trial of Theodore Adamo and Domenico Chiarello began on October 2nd at Litchfield Superior Court, attracting a packed courtroom of spectators. The prosecution opened its case with 9 witnesses, focusing on the grim discovery of Antonio Russo's body on May 12th. Among those who testified was 12-year-old Vincent Stanoulis, who first found Russo's body, a staged suicide note, and a revolver in a grove near Spring Street. Police officials, including Sergeant Alphonse Hugret, Officer William H. Twitley, and Captain Calabrese, corroborated Stanoulis's testimony, confirming the scene in the secluded grove. On October 8th, Undertaker Seth F. Benton described finding the bullet hole in the back of Russo's clothing. Medical examiner Dr. Harry B. Hanchett then testified that the bullet wound found in Russo's back would certainly cause death. The next day, defense attorney Edward Mascolo attempted to connect Antonio with bootlegging activities in the Albany area. Frieda Russo herself testified that Antonio worked with one Frank Marchand in running a still. Captain Calabrese, however, denied that he knew of any such bootlegging activity. On October 14th, Mrs. Judette Germano, a shopkeeper and neighbor of Russo's, testified that she saw Russo and Adamo together on the day that Russo was killed. She went on to say that 2 days later, she saw Adamo at her shop. She asked him jokingly,
"What did you do with Russo?"
Adamo acted nervous and replied,
"What do I know about Russo?"
and quickly left her shop. Next to testify was George Rice, a 15-year-old who had been working at Domenico Chiarello's cobbler shop on Church Street. Rice testified that 2 or 3 weeks before the murder, Chiarello had shown him a gun similar to the one found next to Russo's body. Another witness was Gus Barres, a notary public who testified that he had taken the acknowledgement of the patent for the automobile taillight invented by Russo. The state believed that the invention was the motive for Russo's slaying. On October 15th, the hearing of testimony was interrupted by arguments concerning the admissibility of evidence of a surprise witness called by the state. The surprise witness was State Policeman Adolf Pastore, who, disguised as a prisoner, shared a jail cell with Domenico Chiarello from May 26th through the 31st. The admissibility arguments lasted throughout the afternoon, but the next day Pastore was allowed to testify over the strong objections of the defense. Officer Pastore testified that Chiarello told him that if he ever met State Policeman Stanton in the woods, he would kill him and that he was going to get Lieutenant Varelli. He also told Pastore that he owned a gun. On October 21st, the state called August Hartkorn, a New York handwriting expert, to testify. Mr. Hartkorn was one of the chief witnesses for the state and spent 3 days on the stand. He testified that the fake suicide note left near Russo's body was written by Domenico Chiarello. After identifying numerous exhibits of Chiarello's signature, Mr. Hartkorn said,
"The hand that wrote the exhibits just enumerated was the same hand that wrote Exhibit M, the suicide note."
With that, the prosecution rested its case and the defense began its arguments. Their first witness was Wilbur F. Turner, a handwriting expert from Reading, Massachusetts. Turner meticulously examined the forged suicide note alongside Chiarello's signature, analyzing each letter and stroke in detail. He concluded with certainty that in his expert opinion, Chiarello had not written the note. However, he concurred with Mr. Hartkorn's assessment that the note had indeed been penned by someone other than Russo. The defense then called 8 witnesses in rapid succession, aiming to portray Russo as a man who led a shady life. A key focus of the testimony was the 1928 shooting of Frank Siniscalco by Big Jack D'Ambrosio, a prominent local bootlegger who died in an auto accident while attempting to escape capture. The defense argued that Russo had ties to D'Ambrosio, but Judge Frank P. McAvoy excluded most of this testimony. However, Frieda Russo was permitted to testify that her late husband did in fact know D'Ambrosio. Next, Mrs. Nancy Adelone testified that during a visit to the Russo home in 1927, Russo had told her that he and several others had smuggled $100,000 worth of diamonds into the country. However, no additional evidence was provided to support this claim. On October 29th, Michael Savoia took the stand. He was one of 7 men who were interested in Russo's innovative automobile taillight. 5 of the men, including Savoia, Chiarello, and Adamo, had each invested $150 so that Russo could refine the device and secure a patent. Under cross-examination, Savoia stated that 6 of the investors, including Chiarello and Adamo, had pressured Russo to give up 6/7 of his rights to the invention. Savoia said,
"They told Russo that the paper should be signed, for you may die today or tomorrow."
He added that this conversation occurred just weeks before Russo's murder. On redirect examination, the defense clarified that Savoia's statement was not meant literally, more that life is a game of chance, and men are here today and gone tomorrow, to which Savoia responded,
"Yes, that's about what I meant."
Savoia also testified that, in addition to the automobile taillight, Russo had developed a perpetual light for homes, which he claimed could put the electric light and power company out of business. While the fate of the perpetual light remains unknown, the patent for the automobile taillight was still pending at the time of the trial. On November 5th, the attorneys delivered their closing arguments to the jury. Special Assistant State Attorney Howard F. Landon completed his summation against Chiarello and Adamo, stating,
"My theory is that it was the brain of Chiarello that moved the hand of Adamo."
Landon's argument for the state lasted an hour and 20 minutes. Defense attorney James E. McKnight followed with his summation, characterizing the state's case as nothing more than wild speculation and theory. The following day, the case went to the jury. After 4 hours of deliberation, they returned a verdict of not guilty for both defendants. However, moments after his acquittal, Teodoro Adamo was immediately rearrested on a blackmail charge. Adamo had allegedly demanded several $1,000s from former state representative and road contractor John DeMichele, threatening to blow him up if the payment wasn't made. In the spring of 1931, Adamo was convicted of blackmail and faced a choice: serve a 2 to 3 year prison sentence or return to Italy. Adamo opted for deportation, and in April 1931, he returned to his homeland. After his acquittal, Domenico Chiarello continued to live and work in Torrington for the remainder of his life. He ran his shoe repair shop at 366 Church Street for 36 years and passed away on February 1, 1954. Left to raise 3 children alone, Frieda Russo faced significant hardship. In a letter to her mother-in-law, Chiarostella, dated June 30, 1932, Frieda wrote,
My dear mother, for a long time I have not received news from you. I am sure that more than one letter has been lost. I hope you and your family are in good health. My children and I are healthy too. Do not worry about me. I have been taken care of by the municipality. We have resigned ourselves to God's will.
When Frieda mentioned being taken care of by the municipality, she was referring to the Mother's Pension Program, an early social safety net for widows before Social Security was enacted. These pensions provided cash assistance, though payments were typically insufficient to cover basic living expenses. To make ends meet, Frieda supplemented the pension by taking in laundry from others, a testament to her resilience and determination. Frieda and her children lived at 60 Woodbine Street in Torrington for nearly 2 decades. On June 22, 1954, Frieda married Alfred Littke, and the couple stayed in the area for the next 15 years, residing first in Torrington, then New Hartford, and later Harwinton. In 1971, Frieda and Al moved to LaGrange, Maine, where they remained until Frieda's passing on Christmas Day, 1972. She was laid to rest in Hillside Cemetery in Torrington, Connecticut, the town where she had spent much of her life. Antonio's final resting place is at New St. Francis Cemetery in Torrington, in Section 19, though his grave marker's exact location remains unknown. Even though Frieda died over 50 years ago, she is still remembered by her grandchildren for her humor, her kindness, and her warmth. She was one brave lady who who overcame unimaginable obstacles with grace and love. Thank you, Nani. You will not be forgotten.